we are going to dive into the fascinating realm of INFJ, personality types compatibility. How as an INFJ you can understand your interactions and the way your personality type shapes the way you feel, think, and understand other people around you. Just as a clarification, the personality compatibility is not about your childhood trauma, it's not about your gender, it's not about the culture or the values that you have been living in since you were a child. All those things affect your compatibility with someone. But in this video, we are only and purely looking compatibility from the lens of personality types. Therefore, before we jump in, this is not a definitive truth about compatibility. Because let's be real, compatibility is a highly complex subject. Instead, we are here trying to understand how your personality characteristics can clash or work in different ways with other personality types. You can have a framework of understanding the core of your interactions. Compatibility can be understood from the perspective of similarities and resemblance. It can also be understood of the differences and reciprocity. Someone is an extrovert. An extrovert is going to be inherently different in social situations compared to an introvert. Extrovert and extrovert can understand each other, although they can argue over those understandings. Other one likes to party, other one doesn't like to party, other one likes to debate. That's an extroverted characteristic. That means you initiate conversations and you are more likely to be intense in social situations. That's an extrovert characteristic. An introvert, on the other hand, might like social situations, but they are not putting themselves out there. They would rather observe, think, perceive, and respond to the energy that's coming towards them. Extrovert and introvert are different, but they can have reciprocal relationship, understanding each other's differences. They can also really annoy each other because they are completely different. This is just the basis of compatibility, of personality characteristics. So compatibility is not about finding your perfect partner. All the relationships is basically just trying to balance out these different dimensions. So about INFJs. INFJs are highly empathetic, caring types that care about truth and harmony in situations. They are also pretty reflective, which means that they like to think over things. They might have like this calm exterior, but they might have really complex inner worlds that is not always conveyed well to the outside. They have deep emotions, but they hide them pretty deep, and they might be a bit protective of their morals, values, and identity and emotions. They come across a bit like a reserved type, which is why they can be often seen as like these mysterious types. And INFJs are searching for trust in relationships. They value loyalty, although they might have difficulty with consistency. Since INFJs belong to NF temperament, which means that the NF temperament likes to idealize their relationships and their partners, they might imagine like the future version of the person they are being with. And when we are talking about introverted types like INFP and INFJ, this can be dangerous because they can fall into the role of observation, yet having a highly idealized picture of the relationship and the reality, but not actively enforcing it or actively maintaining or pushing that idealized version to happen in reality. This is why INFJs might overthink things in a relationship. They might be overly concerned of the other person's well-being. INFJs care about the inspiration and the motivation that can happen in the relationship. And if an INFJ has a really like high standards when it comes to relationships, this can truly create difficulties, because If those high standards are not met, which is likely, the harsh reality can really crash their world. Of course, let's remember, INFJs, are they male or female INFJs, are gonna be a bit different. INFJs are also true chameleons, so they also adapt to situations and to people when needed. Interestingly, INFJs can also have strong comfort zones, and since they're an introverted type, they also need someone to push them to break their own limits and boundaries. Perfect compatibility for INFJ is someone who inspires them, since they are a highly intuitive type and they like to be aspired. So when they are aspired to be a better version of themselves, that is going to be groundbreaking for an INFJ. So I don't think for an INFJ it's about reinforcing the safety net that they create for themselves, but rather a bit breaking that safety net and letting the INFJ to actually actualize the best version of themselves. So here's a compatibility chart. When we're talking about compatibility, there are people who are gonna resemble you. Like, they have similar cognitive functions than you do. Then there are people who are gonna have the complete opposite cognitive function stack, which is the relationship of reciprocity. Which means that literally if you're an introvert, they're an extrovert. In a really simplistic terms, they have like the opposite way of interacting with the world. But when it comes to temperament, it also matters what are your core needs, motivations. Because if you have a completely different way of understanding the world, you might just have also disparity. Which means that even though you have resemblance and reciprocity based on cognitive functions, there isn't like this core understanding that you guys are even sharing. Those relationships, they give a lot of space for growth for sure, but also it might be more difficult finding a deep connection in those relationships because your core understandings are different. So when it comes to resemblance relationship, the most compatible with an INFJ is gonna be the same type but as an extrovert, just to create a gravitational force. It's going to be a difficult one though, because they are really similar types, although the other one is an extroverted focused type. ENFJs are also passionate, they are harmonious, and they care about the emotional atmosphere. But the difference between an INFJ and an ENFJ is that ENFJs are more actively seeking for stimulation. And this kind of like extroversion can drain an INFJ. And INFJs need their alone time to recharge, so it might be hard for an ENFJ to understand this. They're both empathetic, highly moral people. If they share their like values together, this can create like a deep core understanding of each other. To be honest, I think this type can like understand each other well, but they might be annoyed about how little there is the reciprocity. So if an ENFJ and an INFJ are together, other one has to sometimes look into deep to themselves and kind of give the other person the things they need. Like if an extroverted feeling hero leading function like ENFJ is searching from the INFJ, what are you feeling? Tell me about your values. The INFJ would rather do the same, to be searching from ENFJ, and one of those people have to look deep into themselves and ask themselves, what are my values? How do I feel? Do I understand what I feel? Am I ready to tell the other person how I feel? One of those people is have to step out. But that's gonna happen with all those resemblance relationships because you guys highly understand each other. You might just disagree over those things that you kind of agree on, but you sometimes need the reciprocal approach to things. INFJ and INFJ, well, like I said, I don't recommend like the exact same pairing because you're gonna have really deep understanding of each other. That's given to you because you guys are really similar types. You might just argue over those similarities, but there is no gravitational force there. There is no space for growth in that sense because you guys are really similar. You guys reinforce each other's strengths or weaknesses. But to be honest, these types can have a really deep mutual understanding. They're both seeking to be understood, to be loved. So if that happens, then it can be really like a deep connection. And since there's no extroverted tendencies, they might just like reinforce each other's introspective way of understanding life. And then they can feel really safe with each other in that sense, but lack a bit of like growth. But like I said, if it's two similar types, then one of those types kind of have to step out of their cognitive bias to kind of give the other person what the other person is kind of seeking. Okay, INFJ, ESTP, that's an interesting one because they share same cognitive functions but in complete different order. They also have different temperament tendencies. The NF temperament is interest focused and interested in meanings and identity. An SP temperament, on the other hand, is interested in impacting people, society, in different ways from a more functional, pragmatic perspective. And SPs really care about their freedom. INFJs might aspire to be like an ESTP. They're like, oh, ESTPs are exactly what they would want to be to some degree. They are fearless, practical, spontaneous, which kind of is like the opposite energy of an INFJ. So I think this relationship, they can truly grow a lot in this relationship because they have similar functions but in different order so that their core needs are different. Their way of approaching the life is from the core different, and it might be difficult to understand the other person in that sense. And to be honest, I think there might be a lot of like difficulties and hardships in this kind of relationship. But truly, if they respect each other's differences and are willing to do the work for the growth, it can obviously work and they can learn so much from each other. So the last personality type to have resemblance with INFJs is ISTPs. Well, I mean, they're both introverted types and have completely different way of interacting with the world. Their core needs, temperament is different again, but their cognitive functions are the same. So they have like resemblance in the way of how they work, but they just really prioritize the really differently on things. But I think, again, since there's two introverts, they can create a truly meaningful relationship. And since ISTPs have like this more like calm and logical nature, INFJs might really like aspire to that also. And since ISTP's way of approaching life is more grounded, it can create like a balance with an INFJ. And since ISTPs are definitely like smart people, they're smart, practical, and independent. So the INFJ might really truly appreciate these characteristics. And yet, since INFJs have strong comfort zones, ISTPs can push them out of that. But like I said, I think the lack of like similar core needs is going to be an issue here. Although if you're willing to grow, like any relationship is gonna work if you're willing to grow. So in the middle here we have both similar cognitive functions and different cognitive functions, and based on the temperament they have been put in order. So on the top we have the most compatible, and the lowest is like the least compatible. Well, I mean, the first one is gonna be ENTP. And why is that? Because their number one function that you are using most of your time, which is introverted intuition or extroverted intuition for an ENTP, is in reciprocal order. So ENTP is going to fulfill most of the time the reciprocal need of the INFJ. That is going to be the introverted intuition. Would love to have that kind of openness, stimulative ideas, and like the abstraction of the extroverted abstraction of things that ENTPs and ENFPs can provide that for an INFJ. Well, ENTPs are playful, they enjoy debates, they like discussing, they like stimulating topics, and they can be really like also risk-taking, which to be honest is quite a balance compared to an INFJ, right? But the thing is that ENTPs like poking on like sensitive topics might really hit INFJ's sensitive and emotional side. INFJs can really appreciate ENTPs like this intellectual curiosity. I do think this is one of the best pairings, but I do think it's one of the hardest at the same time because there's just so many things that can go wrong. Like ENTPs are systematic, INFJs are interest. Other one is focusing on identity and meaning, and other one is focusing more on like structure, systematic, a way of understanding the frameworks, in theories, in knowledge. And if an INFJ is really sensitive or like emotionally aware, they can be so aware that the ENTP is not emotionally aware and just get super triggered by that. Also, ENTPs might find it hard to talk about certain topics and they might feel like it's difficult with an INFJ since they're really sensitive. I do think it is one of the best ones, but I do think there are a lot of like difficulties in this one. The next one is of course then INTP, which is just an introverted version of the ENTP. Since they're both introverts, INFJ and INTP can work perfectly and create a really deep connection. And since INTPs are less maybe pushy and arrogant or cocky, they come across like that. I'm not saying ENTPs are like that, but I'm just saying they might come across like a bit like that. The INTP might be a bit more emotionally soothing for an INFJ, you know what I mean? And since both INTPs and INFJs love to be in their head and they love to have a deep, meaningful conversations, I think this relationship can truly like create like a strong connection with each other. And they're both introverts, so they're gonna naturally respect each other's alone time. But of course, this might also be the issue, because who is gonna be the leading one in the relationship? Who is gonna be like the push going forward in some sense? And if INFJs are really emotionally aware, again, an INTP might come across like cold, insensitive. That might be an issue. And since the other one is going to prioritize logic and the other one is going to prioritize maybe like more from the value perspective or the harmony, moral perspective, they have to be willing to kind of respect the differences between logic and feeling to create a bridge for understanding each other and respecting their differences. I do think it's one of the best pairings though. Okay, INFJ and an ENTJ. Well, I mean, ENTJs are goal-oriented, decisive, directing. I do think like an INFJ woman and an ENTJ man could work pretty well. The other way around, oh, not so sure. If you have that kind of experience, please comment below. I'm more than interested to hear about that. Like I've said previously, like gender matters a lot, I think. ENTJ's directness and logical approach can come across like a bit cold, insensitive to an INFJ. But I do think if the INFJ aspires or is inspired by the ENTJ's like strictness and like ambition, I do think together these types can create like great potential. Another interesting pairing is definitely INFJ, INTJ, because it's like they have a lot of similarities, but their approach to life is different. Other one is like more systematic and other one is more interest focused, which means that there is more focus on like symbols and meanings than rather the logical framework on things. But these both types are like deep thinkers and they like to plan things ahead. So they might become like this highly strategic and future oriented pairing who live in their head. But to be honest, INFJs can teach INTJs to be more emotionally aware and more sensitive emotionally, and an INTJ can teach INFJ how to balance their logic with their emotions. So therefore, they can learn from each other a lot. But on the other hand, it can end up being that INFJs just think INTJs are extremely cold and insensitive, and the INTJ thinks the INFJ is irrational or stupid or inconsistent. So there's always like the good side and the bad side of every pairing, obviously. I think this relationship requires a bit of like self-awareness to make this work. INFJ and ESFP. Now we get into the disparity temperaments. Even though INFJs and ESFPs have similar cognitive functions and different, they have really different way of approaching life, like their core needs. SPs are freedom and impact oriented, and Fs are more idealistic, meaning and symbolic focused. But to be honest, like ESFPs are fun, they're outgoing, they're fun-loving, spontaneous. This might draw, you know, INFJs. Younger INFJs are even more attracted to ESFPs because they're like kind of really different from an INFJ, maybe even in a really like relaxing way. This can be both like exciting, but it might also become really frustrating for an INFJ if we're talking like a long-term relationship. And when it comes to ISFP, I would say it's a bit similar. Like I don't see why they would stick together in a long-term relationship, to be honest. I mean, INFJs and ISFP have a bit of similar energies. They can both be like non-confrontational, peaceful people, harmonious. ISFPs can be funny, ISFPs can be artistic, they can be spontaneous, they can really appreciate deep conversations. Why these two pairings would be maybe attracted to each other in the beginning makes sense. But I think like later on, when the relationship continues, they might find out that their way of approaching life is really different. Like the ISFP's focus on more sensory experiences can be a bit exhausting for an INFJ and maybe even limiting to the INFJ's like imaginative way of approaching life. Although I'm really interested like your experiences about this relationship though, so please comment below and tell me. Okay, INFJ and SFJs, ESFJ and ISFJ. Well, I think this is maybe one of the relationships that might stick together and it might work out. They might have a feeling of security with each other, but I just don't know what is kind of there to hold this pairing together. Like, what's the glue there? In some sense, it can be just like the feeling of security or whatever it might be, but like, can you really share your thoughts with the other person is my question. They are so warm and kind people, or they can be really warm and kind people, both SFJs and NFJs. So I mean, everyone would love this pairing, to be honest, like from the outside, but they would just shower each other with the same things. There's no one receiving kind of that experience and appreciating it. They might just get annoyed with each other because of that. It might get really frustrating in that sense. Like, SFJs would prioritize concrete facts and structure from a more societal, human, people-centered focus, yet INFJs would like to focus on imagination, meanings, symbols, identities, values from a more abstract level. They kind of have to step out of their own interests to kind of understand each other. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I'm just saying it might be a bit difficult, like, to find the glue there, what holds these people together. But this is not gonna be a fiery relationship, like, you know, they're not gonna be like arguing because they both like care so much about harmony. Okay, last we have reciprocal relationships. So 4 types that have completely the opposite cognitive function stack compared to an INFJ. The first one, we have ENFP personality type, which is basically the mirror when it comes to functions, is the mirror of the INFJ. So everything they do is literally different, although they have similar core needs because their temperament is the same. They both care about symbols, they both care about meanings, they both have their own interests, but their way of caring about the meaning and searching for symbols and understanding of abstract frameworks is gonna be really different. For an ENFP, it's gonna be the extroverted, focused abstraction. For an INFJ, it's gonna be the introverted, focused abstraction. INFJ is searching and wanting to understand what the ENFJ is feeling, what are the ENFP's values. The ENFP has a strong understanding of their values. What's a good person? Am I a good person? They question that a lot. And the INFJ is ready to give the answer for an identity search in that sense. The ENFP loves to read books, loves to gather information from the outside, the extroverted, focused of information, and they might love to even talk and a bit like, you know, gossip even. But I think the INFJ is much more inherently focused. The INFJ might think, what is the ENFP saying? ENFP is just gathering all this information from the outside. Like, does that even actually make sense? They are interested in the same things, but from a completely different perspective. They have a reciprocal relationship. This relationship can really create like a strong, deep connection and give the other person what the other person is truly seeking for. But it can also create a lot of frustration, chaos, and it can be a fiery relationship in that sense because there's a lot of misunderstanding that can happen there. And not just misunderstanding, actually, it's also just that the other person works so differently than you. You don't know what the hell is going on in the other person's brain. Why would you approach a topic from that perspective? Like, don't you not know that this is important, you know? So like, it requires really stepping out of your comfort zone for these relationships to work. But when they do that and they are willing to grow together, they can truly cover each other's blind spots. The next one is going to be INFP. Well, it's going to be similar than an INFJ, ENFP, because they have like different approach to life, prioritize different things, but yet they have reciprocal relationship. But in addition to this, INFPs are introverted, so the INFJ, INFP, they can have a more deep connection and understanding from an emotional level, but yet they can be more in their comfort zone and it's not as much of a stretch like outside of what you're used to or how you understand the world. And also, since they're both like the same temperament, I'm just thinking like they might just idealize each other so that they're both living in this rich introspective world in idealization of each other. And the third, when it comes to reciprocal relationship, is ESTP. ISTJs. When it comes to STJs, they're logical, they're practical, they are focused on efficiency, they are stable, they like orderliness. So INFJs have similar characteristics, but the core understanding is the temperament is so different. I mean, it can work and you can grow a lot and learn a lot, because in addition to having different cognitive functions, you even have different temperaments. So you don't even have the similar way of approaching life in general. So you have to really step out of your comfort zone and understand the other person, because INFJ is gonna put more focus on the abstraction and the STJs are gonna put more focus on the practicality. They like to make sense on things, and INFJs might not always make sense when it comes to an STJ's opinion, and INFJs might be highly frustrated with that they cannot share their deep thoughts with the STJ. Can be like a bit frustrating relationship. Well, each relationship comes with its own challenges and rewards. At the end of the day, the matter is gonna be how much effort are you willing to put in your relationship? How much are you willing to understand your differences and your similarities in this sense? What are your experiences like? What do you think is the best compatibility for an INFJ? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Please comment below and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next video.